Welcome back. You're still watching NTV Weekend Edition. Thank you for staying with me, Sandra Twinobio. Now, yesterday, the Ministry of Education announced that they have no definite date planned for the partial reopening of schools as per the President's directives in his last national address on the easing of the lockdown put in place to curb the spread of COVID-19. Schools were to reopen to allow students in candidate classes to make up for the lost time and also prepare for the final examinations. The exact date for the reopening was to be communicated by the Ministry of Education. However, even as the ministry continues to consult different stakeholders before there were issues in the guidelines for the reopening of schools. School owners and administrators have raised some concerns over what the reopening would require of them and what they would require from the government. So tonight, to run us through some of these issues is Patrick Kaboyo, the National Secretary of the Federation of Non-State Education Institutions. Welcome to Talk of the Nation tonight.
Thank you, Sandra. Good evening and good evening to viewers.
Well, we know that the date for the reopening of schools and institutions is still very uncertain. What does this mean for the schools?
Thank you, Sandra, and viewers. It is important to note that as we speak now, every parent, student, and the entire community watching us are a bit anxious, or they are full of anxiety because they know that schools are bound to open, but the date is known. But that said, we have also seen some leaks or some fake news makers who have communicated on behalf of the Minister of Education. And also the Minister of Education has tried to put the situation right in terms of what is pertaining. But I want to say that with COVID, we cannot remain closed for life. Business has to run, but has to be regulated. In terms of how ready the sector is, I think it should be informed by a consultative process that promotes a lot of participatory democracy in terms of how students should also have their voices captured. Parents also need to speak. As directors of private education institutions, we are planning to demand for issues and memoranda from all the associations in this country, so that by next week we have a single document for all the private school actors submitted to the Ministry of Education and Sports for the second time. That said, however, the demand remains that for this anxiety to be dealt with, there should be structured communication which communicates hope. And we also note that hope has been there, but sometimes you find people perceiving different communication sent regarding which is authentic and which is not. So I think by next week, if we come together as all entities in the private sector and make our memoranda clear, we shall have clear demands. The first being an education fund to be put in place. As we speak that school should open, we know that many students were requested to leave, and some left their property in the schools where they were. Those are boarding schools, and boarding students could not carry their suitcases, save for those that were near. So as we speak, schools now are keeping that property. Rats could eat their bed sheets or their clothes that they left, save for books that were taken home. So that is a cost. We also look at the closure in March, when Feb was the month that schools began, but schools had not collected fees. We know that there are parents who had sent children to school with either part payment or no payment at all. Hardly a month, even before the first visitation, schools closed, meaning that for a normal school, which runs a budget for wage and non-wage, including development, you cannot go far, meaning that where you are expecting, you did not get. Therefore, for schools to be ready to move as projected, government must liaise, discuss, project, be motherly to ensure that this fund is in place specifically for startup, because this is an abnormal situation.
So in other words, you're trying to say for the parents out there that have been having issues to do with paying school fees, when they get back to school, they feel some sections of the parents' side believe that they shouldn't actually pay at all because they had paid for the previous term.
Parents should not run or hide or bury heads in the sand. As long as your child is in school, you are supposed to pay.
So in other
but
words,
you cannot pay what you do not have.
Okay.
So how should they get what to pay? One, as the federation, we are demanding government to be considerate, to be motherly or fatherly, to put in place an education emergency fund for all private school entities, even public. Because, by the way, when good results are pronounced, PLE, A-level, O-level, the minister comes to read the success story for our country. And those good results mostly are posted by private schools. Are posted by private schools because boys and girls who feed those first-class schools come from first-class private schools that we are in charge of. Meaning that it should not stop at communicating the best results, but it should come also with an incentive to help those big and small, young and beginning entrepreneurs in education have a fund. Then, in terms of teachers who have who have students to pay for because they are parents, we demand that HE, the president, reigns on the ED of NSSF to release that 20%.
Well, before we even go to that 20%,
yes,
there's something I really want to get clearly from you in regards to, we know that eventually schools are going to open.
True.
Even if they just open for candidates, how should that situation be handled? Should the parents of the candidates have to pay? How can a situation like that, because everyone has been affected by COVID-19, how can such a situation be affected? Because be it dealt with, the students probably do not have the money, and also the schools need money to cater for the candidates that will come back to school. How can that situation be dealt with?
You know for sure that there are those parents who had paid school fees up front. There are those parents who had paid half. There are those parents who had not paid at all. This is an issue of rights and responsibility. If you know your child has a right to education, then you should have the responsibility to ensure that this child accesses that right with your input. This means that as a parent, the school still demands that payment from you. There is no private school or any school that demands of any money from parents that will say, we leave that for you not to pay. Because there are costs, there are running costs. Even as we speak now, schools closed, yes, but there are costs of maintenance, there are costs of electricity for security. There are those who are doing some slashing and maintaining the school, meaning that the online systems that are running, they are using money. But of course, parents have not worked for now coming 3 months. This means that it should be a business for our leaders to think about how to put a fund that will help every parent come up to start afresh. Not to go to the bank, not to the commercial bank, but to put an education emergency fund.
Also on the side of the teachers, the government came out recently and said that teachers should be paid for the 2 months they've not been working, and some schools have objected that. What are your thoughts on that?
This, from other quarters, specifically my colleagues in the federation, there are those who welcomed it as very unbelievable. But we want to state that you cannot avoid paying somebody his or her salary. But the question is, where is the source? If I have not been working and I did not collect money in the school, I have not been running, you don't expect me to pay the teacher because I have no reserve fund. That's why I said in my earlier communication that it should be a two-way. an education fund put in place, but also the President and the Minister of Finance to tap the ED of NSSF to be humane enough to consider the number of teachers in this country, to consider the children, daughters and sons of these teachers who have to go back to school, and thus he has to release that 20%. But also NSSF offers or picks surcharge and penalties from private schools that don't pay. This penalty fund, or the money that NSSF picks from the penalties that it gives schools, could be the money that they should start with. But as we speak now, the readiness has to be fused with the financial provision.
Okay. Now, staying with the readiness of the entire institution, we know that sooner or later we'll be forced to live with COVID-19. We do not know when it will ever end. How do you think teaching and school management will do in order to adapt to the current state of affairs?
For me, I think, as I earlier on said, we have to think out of the box. COVID, unless the vaccine is gotten, we are going to be with it, but the Minister of Education and Sports now should be exploiting avenue for new policies, for policy direction, so that we don't remain in the same direction when the wind is blowing elsewhere. This therefore means that expenditure and funding is going to be mostly looking at the e-learning. We need telecom companies to offer the Ministry of Education and our schools with broadband so that internet is accessible. It should become a right. We should spend less on internet because that's where we are going. But as we go there, we also find that there are serious gaps in terms of teacher competence. Not only teacher competence, but generally you find that even the students that have been learning ICT have gotten fewer skills to help them cope with this. And coupled with poverty, parents are constrained to provide for ICT, because as you want to buy bundles of 10,000, you realize that you need beans, you need charcoal, you need food, you need sugar, you have bills, you have electricity bills. So in a way, it has to be brought to the table at the Ministry of Education and Sports, out of the boardroom, but discussing, relating with what is on the ground. What is on the ground is that people are hurting, that people are demanding, that people have not fully learned, save for those in the city and towns. And for us to create that balance, there has to be participation, collecting or voicing, putting our priorities right, and also funding where our priorities should be, and that is e-learning.
All right. Thank you so much for coming to our studios tonight. We know that education is very key in the development of a country, and we hope all the issues that are affecting the education sector will be settled. And as we wait for the ministry to come forward and give a go-ahead for the candidates to go back to school, for the schools to reopen, we hope that all the other issues that affect everyone in the education sector can be dealt with as soon as
We also
possible.
call for a supplementary budget. The minister should ask for a supplementary budget.
All right. We hope they're watching us tonight.
They should indeed, and it should have been yesterday.
All right. Thank you all for joining us on NTV Weekend Edition Talk of the Nation. NTV Weekend Edition will return shortly.